The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty ranch as Tom wiped the sweat from his forehead. 6 months had passed since the accident, and nothing felt right anymore. The sprawling Texas ranch that once echoed with laughter now felt like a prison of memories. Every corner of the house reminded him of what he'd lost, but nothing hurt more than watching his 4-year-old twins, Lily and Luke, waste away before his eyes. Tom had always been a strong man. Years of working cattle and managing the ranch had given him calloused hands and a weathered face that spoke of countless challenges overcome. But this challenge was different. This wasn't about fixing a broken fence or dealing with difficult weather. This was about two little hearts that seemed determined to break his own. The twins used to be the light of the ranch. Before the accident, they would race through the kitchen every morning, their bare feet slapping against the wooden floors as they chased each other around the breakfast table. They'd climb onto chairs that were too big for them, swinging their legs as they devoured pancakes and asked endless questions about everything from why the sky was blue to whether horses could fly. Now those same chairs sat empty most mornings, the silence so thick it felt like it might suffocate him. It started small, as most tragedies do. A few days after the funeral, Lily pushed away her favorite cereal. Luke refused his usual peanut butter sandwich. Tom figured it was normal grief, something that would pass with time. People from town kept telling him that children were resilient, that they'd bounce back faster than adults. But weeks turned into months, and instead of getting better, things got worse. The twins had developed their own silent language of rebellion. They would sit at the dinner table like tiny soldiers, backs straight, eyes focused on their plates, but their mouths sealed tight. Tom would place their favorite foods in front of them, chicken nuggets that used to disappear in minutes, mac and cheese that once brought squeals of delight, cookies that used to create crumb trails throughout the house. But nothing worked. They'd take a bite or two if he begged, but that was it. Tom found himself doing things he never imagined. He'd sneak into their room at night with crackers and juice boxes, desperate to get any calories into their shrinking bodies. He'd catch them when they thought he wasn't looking, and his heart would break all over again. Their cheeks, once round and rosy from ranch life, had become hollow. Their clothes hung loose on their small frames. The spark in their eyes, the one that reminded him so much of their mother, was fading day by day. The ranch hands tried to help in their own way. Old Pete, who'd worked the ranch for 20 years, would bring the twins to see the new calves, hoping to spark their interest in something, anything. Maria, the cook who came in 3 times a week, tried making special treats, colorful cookies shaped like animals, thinking maybe fun food would tempt them. But the twins just stared at everything, with those big, sad eyes that seemed to hold secrets too heavy for such young shoulders. Doctor visits became a regular occurrence. The pediatrician, a kind woman who delivered both twins, ran test after test. Blood work, examinations, even consultations with specialists in the city, but every test came back normal. Physically, there was nothing wrong with Lily and Luke. The problem was deeper than medicine could reach. Tom's nights were the hardest. He'd lie awake listening to the house settle, remembering how different things used to be. His wife had been the heart of their home, the one who made everything work. She'd sing while cooking breakfast, dance with the twins in the living room, and somehow make even the most ordinary days feel magical. Now the house felt hollow, like a shell of what it used to be. The worst part was feeling helpless. Tom could fix almost anything on the ranch. He could deliver a calf, mend a broken gate, or calm a spooked horse. But he couldn't fix his children's broken hearts, and he couldn't understand why they were doing this to themselves. He'd tried everything he could think of. He'd read parenting books, called his sister for advice, even reached out to a counselor in town. But nothing seemed to reach them. Friends and neighbors meant well, but their advice only made things worse. They'd suggest he be firmer, that he was letting the twins control the situation. Others said he should just ignore the behavior, that eventually hunger would win. But Tom couldn't stand the thought of his children suffering more than they already were. He'd seen what grief could do to adults, how it could eat away at a person from the inside. He couldn't imagine what it was doing to minds so young and fragile, Some evenings, Tom would sit on the porch after the twins had gone to bed, staring out at the vast expanse of his ranch. The land that had once felt like freedom now felt like isolation. He'd think about his wife, about the last conversation they'd had, about all the plans they'd made for the future. None of those plans had included raising their children alone. Watching them fade away like flowers without water. The twins had started avoiding the kitchen entirely. They'd find excuses to stay outside, playing quietly in the dirt or sitting by the fence watching the horses. When mealtime came, Tom would have to search for them, usually finding them hiding in the barn or behind the old oak tree near the house. Getting them to come inside had become a daily battle of wills that left everyone exhausted. What scared Tom most was how quiet they'd become. Before the accident, Lily and Luke had been chatterboxes, filling every moment with questions, stories, and the endless chatter of curious children. Now they whispered to each other when they thought no one was listening, but they barely spoke to him at all. It was like they were living in their own private world, one where he wasn't welcome. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in late October. Tom had prepared what used to be their favorite breakfast, scrambled eggs with cheese and toast cut into fun shapes. He'd even added a smiley face made of ketchup, something that used to make them giggle. But when he called them to the table, they just stared at the food like it might hurt them. That's when Tom realized he was losing them. Not just their appetite, but them. The children he'd raised, the ones who used to climb on his back and beg for piggyback rides, were disappearing before his eyes. He needed help, real help, from someone who understood children better than he did. He needed someone who could reach them in ways he couldn't. That afternoon, Tom made a decision that would change everything. He picked up the phone and started making calls, searching for someone who specialized in helping children deal with grief. He wasn't going to lose his children. He couldn't. They were all he had left of the life he'd built, the love he'd shared, the future he'd dreamed of. Whatever it took, however long it took, he was going to find a way to bring them back from wherever they'd gone in their minds. The ranch that had once been filled with the sounds of a happy family now held only the echo of what used to be. But Tom was determined to change that. He just had to find the right person to help him reach his children before it was too late. Little did he know that the answer would come from an unexpected source, and that the truth behind his children's behavior was more heartbreaking than he could have ever imagined. The phone calls had taken weeks. Tom spent countless evenings after the twins went to bed, scrolling through websites and calling agencies, trying to find someone who could help his children. Most of the responses were the same. They didn't have anyone available, or they only worked in the city, or they specialized in older children. Tom was starting to lose hope when he finally got a call back from a woman named Grace. Grace had been working with grieving families for over 15 years. Her voice was warm and patient as she listened to Tom explain his situation. She didn't interrupt or offer quick solutions like everyone else had. Instead, she asked careful questions about the twins' behavior, their daily routines, and how they'd been since the accident. For the first time in months, Tom felt like someone actually understood the gravity of what was happening. After their phone conversation, Grace agreed to visit the ranch. She warned Tom that it might take time to see results, that working with grieving children required patience and a gentle approach. Tom didn't care how long it took. He was ready to try anything that might help bring his children back to him. The morning Grace arrived, Tom was nervous in a way he hadn't been since his first day of school. He'd cleaned the house from top to bottom, not sure what to expect from a professional nanny. He'd imagined someone stern and clinical, maybe carrying a briefcase full of charts and schedules. Instead, Grace stepped out of her small blue car looking like someone's favorite grandmother. She was probably in her mid-50s, with silver-streaked brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and laugh lines around her eyes that spoke of years spent smiling. She wore comfortable jeans and a soft sweater, and she moved with the kind of easy confidence that comes from years of experience. But what struck Tom most was how she looked at the ranch, not like she was judging it, but like she was trying to understand it. Grace didn't immediately ask to meet the twins. Instead, she sat on the porch with Tom, drinking coffee and talking about the ranch, about his wife, about what life had been like before the accident. Tom found himself sharing stories he hadn't told anyone, memories that hurt too much to revisit, but somehow felt safe to share with this stranger who listened without trying to fix everything. When Lily and Luke finally appeared, peeking around the corner of the house like shy wild animals, Grace didn't make a big deal of it. She simply smiled and waved, then continued her conversation with Tom as if nothing had happened. The twins watched from a distance, clearly curious about this new person, but not ready to come closer. Over the next few days, Grace seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at once. She had a gift for being present without being intrusive. She'd sit on the porch reading a book while the twins played in the yard, always available if they needed something but never pushing for interaction. She helped Tom with small tasks around the house, learning the rhythms of their daily life without trying to change anything right away. What amazed Tom was how Grace seemed to notice everything without appearing to watch. She saw how the twins avoided the kitchen during certain times of day, how they always walked around the dining room table instead of past it, how they clutched their mother's old cardigan that Tom had given them weeks ago. She noticed that they ate better when they were outside, that they seemed more relaxed in the barn than in the house, but Grace never mentioned these observations to Tom right away. Instead, she started making small changes that seemed natural. She began having lunch on the back porch instead of in the kitchen, casually inviting the twins to join her and Tom. She'd spread a blanket on the grass and call it a picnic, making ordinary sandwiches feel like an adventure. The twins were still reluctant to eat, but they at least sat with her, drawn by her gentle presence. Grace had a way of talking to the twins that was different from how other adults approached them. She didn't talk down to them or try to cheer them up with forced enthusiasm. Instead, she spoke to them like they were real people with real thoughts and feelings. She'd comment on things she noticed, a bird in the yard, a cloud that looked like a horse, the way the sunlight hit the barn, without expecting them to respond. Slowly, the twins began to warm up to her. It started with small things. Luke would bring her a flower he'd picked from the garden. Lily would sit a little closer during their outdoor meals. They still weren't eating much, but they were starting to engage with the world around them in ways they hadn't since the accident. Tom watched all of this with a mixture of hope and heartbreak. He could see that Grace was reaching his children in ways he hadn't been able to, and while part of him was grateful, another part felt like a failure as a father. Grace seemed to sense his struggle and would often remind him that grief affects everyone differently, that there was no shame in needing help. One evening, as they sat on the porch after the twins had gone to bed, Grace finally shared some of her observations with Tom. She'd been watching the children for 2 weeks by then, and she'd noticed patterns in their behavior that even Tom had missed. She pointed out how the twins seemed to avoid anything that reminded them of their mother's daily routines, how they flinched when certain songs played on the radio, how they seemed to carry a weight that was too heavy for their small shoulders. Grace explained that children often process grief differently than adults. While adults might cry or talk about their feelings, children sometimes express their pain through behavior. The twins' refusal to eat wasn't just stubbornness or a phase. It was their way of communicating something they couldn't put into words. What Grace said next changed everything for Tom. She told him that in her experience, when children develop such specific and persistent behaviors after a trauma, there was usually a deeper reason. She suspected that the twins were carrying some kind of guilt or fear related to their mother's death, something that was eating away at them from the inside. Tom felt his heart sink. He'd been so focused on trying to get them to eat that he'd missed the bigger picture. His children weren't just grieving, they were suffering in a way he hadn't understood. Grace reassured him that this was more common than he might think, that young children often blame themselves for things that are completely beyond their control. Over the next few days, Grace began to work more intentionally with the twins. She'd sit with them during their quiet moments, not pushing for conversation, but simply being present. She'd tell them stories about other children she'd worked with, always careful to protect their privacy, but sharing enough to let Lily and Luke know they weren't alone in their struggles. The breakthrough came during what Grace called a memory walk. She'd suggested they take a tour of the ranch, letting the twins show her their favorite places. As they walked, she'd ask gentle questions about what they used to do in each spot, encouraging them to share happy memories of their mother without making it feel like a formal therapy session. It was during this walk that Grace noticed something crucial. Every time the twins talked about their mother, they'd exchange a look, a quick worried glance that spoke of shared secrets. They'd start to smile at a memory, then suddenly become serious again, as if they'd remembered something that made them sad. Grace realized that the twins were hiding something that was connected to their mother's death and their refusal to eat. She'd seen this before in other children, the way guilt could manifest in self-punishing behaviors. But she also knew that rushing to uncover their secret could do more harm than good. She needed to build more trust, to create a safe space where they could finally share whatever burden they'd been carrying. As Grace tucked the twins into bed that night, she made them a promise. She told them that no matter what they were feeling, no matter what they thought they'd done wrong, she and their father would always love them. She didn't expect them to respond, but she saw something shift in their eyes, a flicker of hope mixed with fear, as if they wanted to believe her but weren't sure they could. Tom stood in the doorway watching, finally beginning to understand that his children's healing would require more than just getting them to eat. It would require uncovering whatever truth they'd been hiding, whatever pain they'd been carrying alone. With Grace's help, he was ready to face whatever came next, no matter how difficult it might be. Grace had been at the ranch for 3 weeks when she first heard the whispers. It was late afternoon, and she was folding laundry in the hallway when she caught the sound of hushed voices coming from the twins' bedroom. She paused, not to eavesdrop, but because something in their tone made her heart ache. There was a heaviness to their conversation that no 4-year-old should carry. She couldn't make out the words, but she could hear the emotion. Luke's voice was shaky, like he was trying not to cry. Lily's was fierce and protective, the way older siblings sound when they're trying to be brave for someone smaller. Grace had seen this dynamic before. Twins often develop their own secret language, their own way of protecting each other from the world, but this felt different. This felt like they were protecting each other from something much darker. That evening, Grace started paying closer attention to the twins' behavior patterns. She noticed they had rituals that seemed almost ceremonial. Every morning, they would sit together on their mother's side of the bed for exactly 5 minutes, holding hands and staring at the wall. They would avoid the kitchen completely between 3 and 4 in the afternoon. And whenever Tom mentioned their mother in a happy way, they would immediately find excuses to leave the room. Grace began to suspect that the twins weren't just grieving, they were carrying guilt. She'd seen it before in children who had experienced trauma. Sometimes kids would blame themselves for things that were completely beyond their control. A divorce, a death, an accident. Children's minds work differently than adults, and they often found ways to make themselves responsible for things that weren't their fault. But figuring out what exactly the twins felt guilty about would require patience and careful observation. Grace knew that pushing too hard could make them withdraw even further. Instead, she started creating opportunities for them to talk, if they wanted to. She began telling them stories during their outdoor meals. Not fairy tales or made-up adventures, but real stories about other children she'd worked with. She'd talk about a little boy who thought he'd caused his grandfather's heart attack because he'd been too loud one day, or a girl who stopped eating because she believed she was the reason her parents got divorced. She never made direct comparisons to the twins' situation, but she could see them listening intently, especially when she talked about how these children had been carrying burdens that weren't theirs to carry. The first real breakthrough came during a thunderstorm. Grace was in the living room reading when she heard crying from the twins' room. She knocked softly and found them huddled together on Luke's bed, both of them trembling. The storm outside was fierce, with bright flashes of lightning and loud crashes of thunder that shook the windows. Grace sat down on the edge of the bed and simply stayed with them. She didn't try to tell them the storm wasn't scary or that they should be brave. Instead, she acknowledged that storms could be frightening and that it was okay to feel afraid. As the thunder rumbled overhead, Lily suddenly spoke up. "The loud noise," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. "It sounds like when Mommy's car broke." Grace felt her heart skip a beat. This was the first time either twin had mentioned anything specific about the accident. She kept her voice calm and gentle as she responded. "That must have been very scary," she said softly. "Sometimes loud noises can remind us of things that hurt us." Luke nodded, tears streaming down his face. "We heard it from the kitchen," he said, "the big crash sound. And then Daddy was crying on the phone." Grace realized that the twins had been home when the accident happened. They'd heard the phone call that changed their lives forever. But there was something else in their voices, something that suggested they felt responsible somehow. Over the next few days, Grace gently encouraged the twins to share more about that terrible day. She learned that their mother had been planning to make their birthday cake when the accident happened. The twins had been excited about turning 4, and they'd been asking their mother all week about what kind of cake she was going to make. She said she was going to make it extra special, Lily said during one of their quiet conversations. She said she needed to go to the store to get the best ingredients. Grace felt a chill run down her spine. She was beginning to understand. What the twins believed, that their mother had died because she was trying to make their birthday cake. In their young minds, they'd connected their excitement about the cake to their mother's death. The full truth came out slowly, piece by piece. The twins had been playing in the kitchen that morning, pretending to bake cakes with their toy dishes. They'd been asking their mother endless questions about the real cake, begging her to tell them what it would look like, what flavor it would be, whether it would have their names on it. Their mother had laughed and played along, promising them the most beautiful cake they'd ever seen. She'd told them she needed to go to the special bakery supply store in town to get colored frosting and decorative sprinkles. The twins had clapped and cheered, bouncing around the kitchen with excitement. That was the last conversation they'd had with their mother. She'd kissed them goodbye, promised to be back soon, and driven away to get supplies for a birthday cake that would never be made. Grace understood now why the twins had stopped eating. In their minds, their excitement about the cake had caused their mother's death. They believed that if they hadn't wanted a special birthday cake, their mother wouldn't have gone to the store. She would still be alive, but the situation was even more complicated than that. Grace discovered that well-meaning relatives had made comments that reinforced the twins' guilt. At the funeral, she learned their aunt had said something like, "Mommy was on her way to make your cake when the accident happened." Their grandmother had mentioned that their mother had been doing something special for the twins when she died. These adults had meant no harm. They were probably trying to show how much their mother had loved them. But to 4-year-old minds, processing grief and trauma, these comments had become evidence of their guilt. Grace also realized that the twins' behavior patterns were connected to their mother's routine. They avoided the kitchen between 3 and 4 because that's when their mother used to start preparing dinner. They couldn't bear to sit in the dining room because that's where they'd been sitting when they asked about the cake. Even their morning ritual of sitting on their mother's side of the bed was their way of trying to apologize to her. The twins had been punishing themselves for 6 months, believing they were responsible for their mother's death. They'd stopped eating because they didn't think they deserved food. They'd stopped playing because they didn't think they deserved happiness. They'd been carrying this enormous burden of guilt, and no one had realized it. Grace knew she had to be incredibly careful about how she handled this revelation. The twins had built their entire understanding of the tragedy around their own guilt. Simply telling them they weren't to blame wouldn't be enough. She needed to help them understand why they felt guilty and then slowly help them see the truth. She also realized that Tom needed to know what his children had been going through. He'd been so focused on trying to get them to eat that he hadn't understood the deeper pain they were experiencing. This wasn't just about grief, it was about a fundamental belief that they were responsible for their mother's death. That night, after the twins had gone to bed, Grace sat down with Tom on the porch. The conversation was one of the most difficult she'd ever had. She watched Tom's face crumble as he realized what his children had been carrying alone. He blamed himself for not seeing it for not understanding what they needed, but Grace helped him understand that this wasn't his fault either. Grief makes people focus on survival, on getting through each day. Tom had been doing his best to keep his family together during the worst time of their lives. Now that they knew what was really wrong, they could start to heal. The next phase would be the hardest, helping the twins understand that their mother's death wasn't their fault, that wanting a birthday cake was normal and innocent, and that they deserved to live and be happy. It would require patience, love, and probably professional help. But for the first time since the accident, there was hope. The secret was out, and the healing could finally begin. Grace knew that the hardest part was just beginning. Now that she understood what the twins believed, she had to find a way to help them see the truth without making them feel worse. She couldn't just tell them they were wrong. That would be like trying to convince someone that their deepest fear wasn't real. Instead, she needed to gently guide them toward understanding. One small step at a time. The morning after her conversation with Tom, Grace decided to change her approach completely. Instead of trying to get the twins to eat in the house, she packed a simple picnic and led them to their favorite spot by the old oak tree. The tree had a thick trunk and spreading branches that created a natural shelter, and the twins always seemed more relaxed there. She spread out a blanket and unpacked sandwiches, but she didn't make a big deal about the food. Instead, she started talking about memories, but not the painful ones. She asked about the happy times, the silly moments, the ordinary days that made up their life before the accident. "Tell me about your favorite breakfast with Mommy," Grace sighed, keeping her voice light and curious. "What did she make that made you both giggle?" Luke looked up with the first hint of a smile Grace had seen in weeks. "She made pancakes that looked like animals," he said softly. "Mine was always a dinosaur because I roared at it." Lily nodded, her eyes brightening just a little. "She made mine look like a butterfly, and she would flap the pancake pieces like wings and make buzzing sounds." Grace smiled, encouraging them to continue. "That sounds wonderful. She must have been very creative. What else did she do that made you laugh?" For the next hour, the twins shared memory after memory. Their mother dancing in the kitchen while cooking dinner, the way she would sing silly songs in the car, how she would make up funny voices for their stuffed animals. With each memory, the twins seemed to relax a little more, and Grace noticed. They even took a few bites of their sandwiches without realizing it, but Grace was working toward something specific. She needed to help the twins understand that their mother's love for them was what made her happy, not what put her in danger. She needed them to see that doing special things for people you love isn't a burden, it's a joy. "Your mommy sounds like she loved making you happy," Grace said carefully. "I bet she loved planning surprises for you." The twins' faces immediately clouded over. They exchanged that look again, the one that said they were sharing a terrible secret. Grace knew she was getting close to the heart of their pain. "She was going to make our cake," Lily whispered, her voice barely audible. "Our birthday cake? We asked her to make it special." Grace felt her heart break for these children all over again. "And that made you happy, didn't it? Knowing she was going to make you a special cake?" Both twins nodded, tears starting to form in their eyes. "And it made her happy too," Grace continued gently. "Mommies love making special things for their children. It's one of the best parts of being a mommy." Luke's lips started to tremble. "But she died because of the cake," he said. "Because we asked for it." This was the moment Grace had been preparing for. She needed to help them understand that their mother's love wasn't the problem. The accident was just a terrible thing that happened, not something they caused. "Can I tell you a story?" Grace asked, and the twins nodded. "I knew a little girl once who loved butterflies. She asked her daddy to take her to the butterfly garden at the zoo. On the way there, their car got a flat tire. The little girl thought it was her fault because she had asked to go see the butterflies. But do you know what her daddy told her?" The twins shook their heads, listening intently. "He told her that flat tires happen sometimes, no matter where you're going. He said that even if they had been going to the grocery store or to visit Grandma, they still might have gotten a flat tire. The flat tire wasn't because of the butterfly garden, it was just something that happened. Grace could see the twins thinking about this, trying to understand how it connected to their situation. Sometimes bad things happen when we're doing happy things, Grace continued. But the bad thing isn't because of the happy thing, they're separate. Your mommy's accident happened while she was going to get cake supplies, but it wasn't because of the cake supplies. It was just a terrible accident. Lily was crying now, but she was listening. But if we hadn't asked for the cake, she wouldn't have gone to the store, she said. Grace nodded. That's true. But if you hadn't asked for the cake, she might have gone to the store for something else. She might have gone to get groceries or gas for the car or medicine from the pharmacy. Mommies go to stores all the time for lots of different reasons, she paused, letting this sink in. The important thing is that your mommy loved you so much, that making you happy made her happy too. She didn't go to the store because she had to. She went because she wanted to do something special for you, and that made her feel good inside. Luke was sobbing now, and Grace reached out to hold both twins as they cried. This was the release they'd needed for months, not just grief for their mother, but guilt that had been eating them alive. We miss her, Lily cried into Grace's shoulder. We miss her so much. Of course you do, Grace said, stroking her hair. She was your mommy, and she loved you very much. It's okay to miss her. It's okay to be sad, but it's not okay to blame yourselves for what happened. They sat under the oak tree for a long time, the twins crying out months of pain and fear. Grace held them and let them grieve, knowing that this was necessary for their healing. Sometimes you have to feel the pain before you can let it go. When their tears finally slowed, Grace helped them understand something else important. Your mommy would want you to be happy, she said. She would want you to eat good food and play and laugh. She wouldn't want you to be sad forever. But how do we know? Luke asked. How do we know what she would want? Grace smiled. Because that's what mommies want for their children. They want them to be healthy and happy and loved. Even when mommies can't be with their children anymore, they still want those things for them. Over the next few days, Grace continued these conversations. She helped the twins understand that grief was normal, that missing their mother was natural, but that punishing themselves wasn't what their mother would have wanted. She used simple examples they could understand, like how they wouldn't want their favorite stuffed animals to be sad if something happened to them. Slowly, the twins began to eat a little more, not a lot, but enough to give Tom hope. More importantly, they began to talk about their mother in ways that weren't filled with guilt. They started to remember the good times without immediately feeling bad about them. Grace also worked with Tom, helping him understand how to support his children through this process. She taught him to listen without trying to fix everything, to validate their feelings, while gently challenging their guilty thoughts. The breakthrough came during a sunset picnic by the pond. The twins were actually eating their sandwiches when Lily suddenly stopped and looked at Grace with tears in her eyes. Grace, she said, do you think Mommy knows we're sorry? Grace's heart ached for this little girl who had been carrying such a heavy burden. I think your mommy knows you love her, she said. And I think she wants you to know that there's nothing to be sorry for. You didn't do anything wrong, Luke nodded, wiping his eyes. We just wanted a cake, he said quietly. And that was perfectly okay, Grace assured him. Wanting a birthday cake is what 4-year-olds do? Your mommy knew that, and she loved making you happy. That night, for the first time since the accident, both twins ate a full dinner. They still had a long way to go, but they had finally begun. To believe that they deserved to be fed, to be happy, to be loved. The secret that had been poisoning their hearts was finally out in the open, and the healing could truly begin. 3 months after Grace's arrival at the ranch, the sound of laughter echoed through the kitchen for the first time since the accident. Lily was giggling as flour dusted her nose, and Luke was trying to crack an egg with more enthusiasm than skill. Grace stood beside them, patiently guiding their small hands as they attempted to make pancakes together. It hadn't been an easy journey to get to this moment. After the twins had finally shared their secret and begun to understand they weren't to blame for their mother's death, the real work of healing had started. Grace knew that knowledge and feeling were two different things. The twins might understand logically that they weren't responsible, but their hearts still needed time to catch up. The first step had been getting Tom involved in a way that felt natural. Grace suggested that instead of formal family meetings, they should have what she called memory sharing time. Every evening after dinner, they would sit together on the porch and share one happy memory about their mother. It wasn't forced or scheduled, just a gentle invitation to remember the good times. Tom had been hesitant at first. His own grief was still raw, and talking about his wife was painful. But Grace helped him understand that his children needed to see that it was okay to remember their mother with joy, not just sadness. They needed to learn that love doesn't end with death, and that happy memories were treasures to be cherished, not sources of guilt. The first few memory-sharing sessions were quiet and careful. Tom would tell simple stories about how their mother used to sing in the shower or how she always left little notes in his lunch. The twins would listen with wide eyes, slowly learning that it was safe to smile when thinking about their mom. Then Lily shared a memory about how their mother used to let them help her garden and how she would make up names for all the flowers. Luke remembered how she would read them bedtime stories with different voices for each character. With each shared memory, the heavy cloud of guilt that had surrounded the twins began to lift. Grace also worked on rebuilding their relationship with food, but she did it gradually. She started by involving them in cooking, showing them that preparing meals could be fun and creative, not just a reminder of loss. They began with simple things: washing vegetables, stirring batter, arranging cookies on a baking sheet. The kitchen slowly transformed from a place of painful memories to a space where new, happy memories could be made. The breakthrough with food came when Luke announced he wanted to make dinosaur pancakes like his mother used to make. Grace's heart skipped a beat, knowing this was a huge step. Instead of being afraid of the memory, Luke was choosing to honor it by recreating something that had brought him joy. Working together, they figured out how to make the batter into dinosaur shapes. The pancakes didn't look exactly like the ones their mother had made, and Luke's first attempt looked more like a blob than a dinosaur. But he laughed when it didn't turn out perfect, and Grace knew they'd turned a corner. Grace also recognized that the family needed professional help beyond what she could provide. She gently suggested to Tom that they might benefit from talking to someone who specialized in helping children deal with grief and trauma. Tom was initially resistant. He worried about strangers analyzing his family, about making his children relive their pain, but Grace explained that therapy wasn't about digging up painful memories or fixing what was broken. It was about giving the family tools to handle their grief in healthy ways and making sure the twins continued to heal as they grew older. She helped Tom find a family counselor who understood childhood trauma and had experience with situations like theirs. The counseling sessions were different from what Tom had expected. Dr. Rodriguez was warm and patient, and she met with the family in a comfortable office that felt more like someone's living room than a medical facility. She used play therapy with the twins, helping them express their feelings through drawing, storytelling, and games. Through therapy, the family learned important things about grief. They discovered that it wasn't something to get over, but something to carry with them in a healthy way. They learned that feeling sad sometimes was normal, that missing their mother would probably never completely go away, and that this was okay. The twins also learned new ways to remember their mother. Dr. Rodriguez helped them create a memory box filled with photos, letters their mother had written, and small mementos that reminded them of happy times. Instead of avoiding thoughts of their mother, they began to seek out ways to feel connected to her. One of the most powerful moments came when Lily decided she wanted to finish the birthday cake their mother had been planning to make. Grace and Tom worked with her to recreate what they thought the cake might have looked like, using photos of previous birthday cakes their mother had made as inspiration. As they decorated the cake together, Lily talked about how she thought her mother would have wanted it to look. She added extra sprinkles because Mommy always said more sprinkles meant more happiness. When they lit the candles, both twins made wishes, and for the first time since the accident, they seemed genuinely excited about something. The cake didn't. bring their mother back, but it gave them a way to feel connected to her love. It transformed the memory of that last conversation from something painful into something bittersweet but beautiful. Their mother's final gift to them hadn't been a cake. It had been the knowledge that she loved them enough to want to make something special just for them. As the months passed, life at the ranch began to find a new rhythm. The twins started eating regular meals again, though they still had difficult days. They began playing with the energy and curiosity that Tom remembered from before the accident. Most importantly, they started talking about their mother naturally, without the weight of guilt crushing their spirits. Grace had initially planned to stay for just a few months, but as the family healed, Tom realized he didn't want her to leave. Not because they still needed her professional help, but because she had become part of their family. She understood their story, their pain, and their healing in a way that no one else could. When Tom asked Grace to stay permanently, it wasn't just as a nanny, but as someone who could help them continue building their new life together. Grace had grown to love this broken family that had slowly put itself back together, and she couldn't imagine leaving them now. The ranch that had once been filled with silence and sadness began to buzz with life again. The twins raced through the kitchen in the mornings, their laughter mixing with the sound of sizzling bacon and brewing coffee. They helped feed the horses, chased chickens around the yard, and filled the house with the normal chaos of happy children. Tom found himself smiling more, not because his grief was gone, but because he could see his children healing. He could see them becoming the kids their mother would have wanted them to be, happy, healthy, and loved. The guilt that had been eating them alive was replaced with warm memories and the security of knowing they were cherished. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Lily climbed onto Tom's lap and looked up at him with clear, bright eyes. "Daddy," she said, "I think Mommy would be happy that we're eating good food again." Tom felt tears in his eyes, but they were different tears than the ones he'd cried for months after the accident. These were tears of gratitude, of hope, of love, that continued even after loss. "I think so too, sweetheart," he said, holding her close. "I think she'd be very happy." The ranch would always hold memories of the woman they'd lost, but it was no longer a place haunted by grief and guilt. It had become a home again, filled with love, laughter, and the promise of new tomorrows. The twins had learned that their mother's love for them hadn't caused her death. It had given their lives meaning. And that love would continue to nourish them, just like the food they now ate with grateful hearts, for all the years to come.